Hey guys, Nick here. Welcome back to the channel talking science of endurance and everything sports science in general. Thanks to everyone who's already subscribed to the channel so far, and hopefully you've been enjoying plenty of the videos that have been coming out. If you haven't already, please consider hitting that big red subscribe button down below, clicking the bell icon as well to make sure you're notified every single time I chuck up a video on the channel here. Trying to get them out most days of the week, Monday through to Friday. So plenty of videos coming your way, but thanks again for the support so far. I'm looking forward to keeping that discussion in the comments going as we have been already. And leading off the back of, I guess, those discussions in the comments, something I want to talk about today was throughout these discussions, I'm seeing a lot of athletes and a lot of people asking questions about numbers. And this is where I really want to go today in terms of understanding that we can't just have in sports performance, we can't just have numbers and data points. We need to have a context behind why or how that data has occurred. Because at the end of the day, a number is a number. If you have a VO2 max of 60 or you have an FTP of 300, that's just a number. But what does that practically mean in terms of how did you get that number? So the training that you did to get there, how long it's taken you to get there, where can we now go and can we further develop that number? It's all of this information that we need to provide context to give us the actual insights in terms of what is happening from a performance perspective. Otherwise, we're just going to have a number that's just sitting there and it's just cool to look at. And the prime example I love to talk about, it's the one I'm going to stick with today, is VO2 max. Far too often, and I'm going to admit this as the person who talks a lot about VO2 max and bangs on about it on this channel, the number that is your VO2 max, that is probably the least important thing in my eyes in terms of what that number actually is, specifically what your relative VO2 max is. For those of you who don't know what relative VO2 max is, it's that number that might be a 50 or a 60. It's the one that comes up on your watch. Basically what that number is mils per kilo per minute. So it's how many milliliters of oxygen. So if you're at 60, it's 60 milliliters of oxygen that you're using per kilogram of body mass per minute. So that's derived from what we call our absolute VO2 max. So absolute is just the total amount of milliliters of oxygen per minute, or also measured in liters per minute, depending on how you're working out. It's the same thing. We take that number, divide it by our body weight in kilograms, gives us our relative. Now, this relative number, yes, it is important to an extent. I'm not going to say it's flat out ridiculous, we don't need to worry about it at all. It's interesting to know, but just knowing it as 60 or just knowing it as 40 means pretty much nothing. And the reason why is because I could have two athletes. I could have athlete A and athlete B. Athlete A could have a phenomenal VO2 max. They could be up at 70 mils per kilo per minute. Athlete B could have a okay VO2 max. They might be at 50 or 55 milliliters per kilo per minute. Who outperforms each athlete? Let me know down in the comments. Who do you think wins before we go any further in terms of any performance? Just because athlete A has a VO2 max of 70, I haven't given you any context here. I've just told you that athlete A is a relative VO2 max of 70 and athlete B is a relative VO2 max of about 50, 55. If you think it's athlete A, I understand where you're coming from in terms of, well, bigger VO2 max must have been better. But this is a relative measure. I didn't tell you any context behind how that number is coming about. That athlete who's getting up to 70 mils per kilo could be a 50 kilo athlete. They have a reasonable absolute, but because they weigh 50 kilos, the relative number goes through the roof. That 50, 55 VO2 max might be someone who's maybe 75, 80 kilos. Their number's going to plummet because they're distributing across more mass. What does this mean? Without knowing that context, well, if we're talking about flat road cycling, if we're talking about long course triathlon on a flat course on a time trial bike, who's going to outperform who? Well, we still don't really know because a heavy athlete may not necessarily be any better than a light athlete. But in most cases, I'm going to say that the heavier athlete is going to be able to turn the pedals a lot more with a lot more ease because they got more mass behind the pedals. That's just basic physics in terms of gravity turning the pedal for them and pushing down and assisting them to an extent. Yes, they have to do a lot of the work, but more weight behind the pedals is going to lead to more force production. It's quite simple. So it's the type of thing that athlete might have an FTP of, let's say, 300. The 50 kilo athlete might have an FTP of 200, 180, depending on how much power they can actually turn out because they just don't have the mass behind the pedals. Now we have a scenario where it's great, you got a VO2 max of 70, but you're still getting outperformed. So this is where the context, and that's just one example. There's a number of different things we can talk about. And some of the key phrases I talk about on this channel, like when we speak about threshold and I talk about percentage of VO2 max, that's more useful than just knowing what your threshold is. If I say my threshold pace is 4-minute K pace, I'm just pulling numbers here. If I say my threshold pace is 4-minute K pace, well, what does that mean? Where does that sit in relation to your VO2 max? Is that at 95% of your VO2 max? So to be able to improve any further and get faster over a 5K or 10K half marathon, do I need to lift the top end of my engine to give me room to move it? And I've spoken about this in previous videos. Or is it at like 75, 80% of my VO2 max where that threshold sits? So I actually have room to be able to go, okay, let's go do some training at 355, 350. Then once we adapt and improve, let's do some training at 345 and boost that up to 90, 95% of the engine. That gives me context. We also talk about velocity of threshold being the key indicator to performance or key predictor of performance, rather than just talking about VO2 max or engine size or threshold as an arbitrary number. It's the velocity that's critical. If you're running at 4-minute K pace at threshold, but the person next to you is running at 345 pace at threshold, well, that 345 pace is a lot faster. That's quite obvious, but in terms of what we're looking at here, it's the context behind just that number. I don't care. Those athletes could have 4 millimoles of blood lactate at threshold, both of them. They could be equal there, but one of them's running faster, so he's probably going to be outperforming the one who's running slower. That just makes sense. So it's this context behind the numbers that we need to understand. So something I really want to challenge all of you on the channel. You've been great so far, leaving as many comments and questions as you can. I'm loving responding it. So please don't take this as I want you to stop or anything like that. I definitely want you to keep going. What I want you to consider is when we're talking about data though, and when you're asking questions, whether it's of me, whether it's of your coach, you're talking with other athletes, consider the context behind the data that you're talking about. What does this actually mean? And what are the other pieces of information that go into this piece of data? It's not just the number in isolation, because that can be left open to a whole range of things. Knowing the parts and the inputs that go into it is really, really the key. And if it's something that you feel, particularly if you're writing it down in the comments below and you're typing away and you're going, gee, this is really hard to explain, I'm more than happy to jump on a call or jump on Zoom. We can do a live session on YouTube and stream it to everyone who can jump in as well. I'm more than happy to do these things to help you guys work through that process, to understand the context better and talk through it, because sometimes that can be a bit of a challenging thing. I understand that. But it's the type of thing, without the context, our data really doesn't mean anything. Like I said before, VO2 max is just a number that we're pulling from somewhere if we don't understand what is actually going into the input of that number and actually creating it in the first place. That's my little summary today. Like I said, I was going to keep it short compared to some of the other videos. Let me know what you think down below. How do you establish a bit of context with your data, or do you just look at the numbers and you haven't really considered, well, what are the factors actually contributing to that number? Let me know in the comments below. Happy to answer. Any questions you do have, please leave them down below. Like always, happy to get involved in that discussion and keep helping you as best I can. If you haven't already, please do consider subscribing to the channel. Keep supporting it. As of recording this video, I think we're at 2,250 subscribers, or just about to tick onto it. If every single one of you shared one of these videos with one of your friends and told them to subscribe, we'd get to 10,000 really, really quick. And that's a crazy thing to think about, but been loving the support so far, and I don't think it's too far out of reach. So keep sharing, keep subscribing down below, keep leaving your comments. Absolutely loving the support. And that is it for today. We'll see you in the next one.